This week, we look at how to end slavery in 5 years. A high-profile case gets tried at the Vatican, and just what is the current state of religious life in North America? Hello and welcome to this edition of Vatican Connections. There was a lot going on at the Vatican this week, so let's get started. This week, Pope Francis and representatives of 5 other religious groups vowed to put an end to slavery. The Pope, along with Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, and Buddhist leaders, signed a declaration calling modern slavery a crime against humanity, and they vowed to mobilize their faithful to wipe it out by 2020. This initiative was organized by the Global Freedom Network, which was formed in March after a joint agreement between the Vatican, Al-Azhar University, and the Anglican Communion. The Global Freedom Network aims to raise awareness about modern slavery, promote ethical purchasing practices among the faithful, care for victims of trafficking, and pressure governments to tighten laws that make slavery possible. According to the 2014 Global Slavery Index, almost 36 million people worldwide are caught in some form of modern slavery. The Dominican Republic's chief prosecutor has praised the way the Vatican has handled the sexual abuse case involving its ambassador to that nation. Joseph Wesolowski was removed from his post as nuncio to the Dominican Republic after allegations surfaced against him. This week, the country's chief prosecutor met with the Vatican's chief prosecutor to discuss the case. He said the Vatican is the right place to prosecute the former nuncio, but he added that the Dominican Republic provided the evidence to make it go ahead. The Vatican spokesperson, Father Federico Lombardi, said because of the condition of his health, Wesolowski has been given some freedom to walk around within Vatican city walls, but his contact with the outside world is limited. Vatican prosecutors have conducted a preliminary interrogation of the former archbishop and are expected to conduct further questioning. This week, the Vatican's Council for the Economy held its 4th general meeting. Now, coinciding with that meeting, Cardinal Pell wrote a piece for the British Catholic magazine Catholic Herald. In that piece, he reveals that officials entrusted with reforming the Vatican's finances have discovered hundreds of millions of euros that were never included in balance sheets before. He said that money was, quote, tucked away in sectional accounts. Now, in the past, congregations and departments enjoyed quite a bit of freedom and kept the books as they wished, not necessarily following modern accounting practices. All that is changing under Cardinal Pell's Secretariat for the Economy. But the event that was clearly still foremost on the Pope's mind this week was his trip to Turkey over the weekend. The trip delivered many memorable moments, starting with his visit to the holy sites in Istanbul. Now, the whole purpose of that trip, of course, was to meet Patriarch Bartholomew. Together, they led an ecumenical prayer service.
chiedo un favore, di benedire me e la Chiesa di Roma.
και η αγάπη του Θεού και Πατρός και η κοινωνία του Αγίου Πνεύματος ή με τα πάντων ημών.
During the return flight to Rome, Pope Francis once again held a press conference and was asked about his visit to the mosque in Istanbul, and the question was, did he actually pray during his visit?
In quel momento ho sentito il bisogno di pregare. E ho detto, ma preghiamo un po'? Sì, ho detto no. Io ho pregato per la Turchia, per la pace, per Moschi, per tutti, per me che ho bisogno. Ho pregato davvero e ho pregato per la pace soprattutto. Ma Signore, finiamo la guerra. Sì, è stato un momento di preghiera, sincera.
Finally, the Pope and his homilies have become must-read material around the world. Our friends at Catholic News Service just released a unique book that guides readers through the liturgical year using Pope Francis's homilies and, of course, their stunning photography.
The book is titled Pope Francis, A Guide to God's Time, because it uses the homilies of Pope Francis to explain the different parts of the liturgical year and the different feasts that we celebrate as Christians. When we go to Mass, when we're at a liturgy, we're no longer in our time, but in God's time, and how God transforms time and transforms us in the process.
The liturgy progresses through the year, so you see in the book all the major feasts. You see Christmas and Easter, you see ordinary time, and you also see the church through the seasons as the liturgical year relates to the seasons as we know them. These images are from a lot of events I photographed, and visually we learn about the Pope's, devotion to Mary. We see his devotion to the Eucharist in the book. In some sense, this Pope has two different modes. He's very engaging and animated when he's meeting people. And by and large, probably the world has mostly seen this side of the Pope. But during liturgies, he also has another side, a very serious, somber side, a very reverent side. We learn something about the Pope in this book.
In our news stories, we're looking for news. In this book, it was a chance to be much more Catholic, to look at what the Pope believes about the Eucharist, for example, and about adoration and praise, about the Church's structure, things that don't make the newspapers, but are obviously very key parts of his pontificate and his teaching about what the Church is called to be.
On December 16th, the Vatican's Congregation for Institutes of Religious Life and Apostolic Life will release the findings of its Apostolic Visitation to women's religious communities in the U.S. The visitation began in 2008. It included visits to various communities held in 2010 and ended with a report submitted to the Congregation for Religious Life. Now, Sister Sara Butler had a hand in parts of that visitation. In fact, she was also part of a conference in the U.S. that led to the visitation. Now, while that was still happening back in 2010, Father Thomas Rosica had a chance to talk to her about religious life in the U.S. at that time.
In September 2008, you were part of a major symposium on religious life held in Massachusetts in Fall River, the Diocese of Fall River, at Stonehill College. No one would have imagined the shockwaves that were sent through the Church, particularly in North America, because of this symposium on reclaiming the treasure that is religious life. Why was the symposium at Stonehill College so significant?
I think this was important because the Cardinal Rodet from the Congregation for Institutes of Religious Life and Institutes of Consecrated Life and Societies of Apostolic Life was present at it, and the topic was to review apostolic religious life for men and women in the United States Church since the Second Vatican Council. So we were invited to kind of address the situation, the current situation of religious life. It was an opportunity for people who hadn't been heard from, who hadn't ever maybe even commented on these topics, to kind of give their own assessment of how apostolic religious life was going for men and women. I think when we were invited to do this, there was a certain amount of collaboration among the speakers ahead of time. We consulted with each other about topics we would cover. We decided not to pull any punches, but just to say what we actually thought was happening.
You addressed the very important question of competing ecclesiologies and the distortions of ecclesiologies. Would you share with us some of your reflections on that important theme?
Well, I think one of the things that happened after the council was people, of course, interpreted the council, and as there were divergent interpretations, some people said, well, you have to, the council really didn't decide this, or this is really maybe a compromise. So some interpreters of the council suggested that there was there were really lots of open questions. And one thing that happened, especially after the encyclical Humanae Vitae in 1968, was people began to say, well, you only have to follow what's the best judgment of most theologians. So in a way there was a kind of magisterium of theologians that took over, and in the aftermath of that, along with many different social movements that we couldn't have anticipated, the feminist movement, for example, and whole liberation theology, civil rights, many different social movements during the immediate era after the council brought people to think about justice in a new way. Even one of the synods, one of the early synods of bishops in 1971 had a document on justice that said the Church itself has to be just in order to critique the injustice elsewhere. And many religious hung on to that, or they picked up a particular theme from that said activity on behalf of promoting justice is a constitutive dimension of the proclamation of the gospel. So picking up on that, they became not only advocates for justice in the world, which of course is part of our call, and really typical of apostolic religious to work to establish the kingdom and to bring about justice in this world, but also people began then to turn in on the Church itself, which we were invited to do. Some people, in looking at the Church, began to be critical of its hierarchical constitution. In particular, a feminist theology suggested that any sort of hierarchy, one up, one down, any sort of hierarchy was sort of inherently unjust. So there were certain definitions of equality that entered in, and certain construction of things as a power politics that have actually altered the way many people think about the Church, and it's been destabilizing, to say the least.
You spoke about what was lost. What needs to be reclaimed? for this gift of religious life, which really is an ecclesial vocation?
Yes. Well, one of the things would be, I think, a clear definition of the vows. It seems to me people have been satisfied to accept what's really the definition of the virtues instead of the vows. In other words, to live simply and to love generously and to listen for God's will attentively, reading the scriptures and so on. But the formal definition of the vows obliges us to very specific obligations. I think we have to reclaim some devotional practices, some of the traditions of asceticism that we've left behind. We've thought it was enough to just work hard, but that's really not enough, And then our a commitment to community living. That's very complex because it's not only sisters didn't just, or men religious or priests and brothers didn't just suddenly decide not to live in large communities. As a study recently showed that there are more religious women over 90 than under 60. Now that's a very dramatic. That's very serious. That means that the communities are dying and that the younger women are having to support a very large population of aging and ill sisters who are living longer and longer. And therefore they have to have, their ministry has to be a paid ministry, and they have to have benefits, and they have to earn enough to keep 2 or 3 other people going. So the situation in the apostolate has changed dramatically, and not only because of things that choices that women or men religious made as a result of the council, but other factors. And we've got to reclaim some control over our own lives. I would like to say where people aren't just working harder and harder and getting older, but are actually living together and have a prayer life together that really sustains them. And it's distinctive in the sense that they have their own devotions, they have their own reason for being. They have to reclaim our own charism, the vision of our founders in such a way as to be not like a parallel church, not to offer people an option to belonging to the Catholic Church, but to be an intense, specialized expression of what it means to be a Catholic.
Thank you, Sister.
He had a whirlwind weekend, but that didn't stop him this week. Pope Francis kept a full schedule. Let's take a look. On Monday, the Pope met with the bishops of Switzerland on their ad limina visit. He said although most of Switzerland's residents might be distant from the Church, they recognize the positive role Catholics and Protestants have played in society. He also spoke about the Abbey of St. Maurice and said it is an impressive witness of 1,500 uninterrupted years of religious life. He told the Swiss bishops their job is to keep the faith alive in their country so that churches and monasteries do not become museums. On Tuesday, Pope Francis took part in the signing of the Interreligious Declaration to End Slavery. He was part of a group of 13 religious leaders from 5 different religious groups, and his 2 friends from Buenos Aires, Rabbi Abraham Skorka and Omar Aboud, were also present at the event. He told the other leaders, "We are all a reflection of the image of God, and we cannot tolerate that God's image should be subject to such abhorrent treatment." Wednesday was the general audience, and Pope Francis took that opportunity to share with the faithful his thoughts on his trip to Turkey. CNS has more.
Oggi voglio condividere con voi alcune cose del mio pellegrinaggio in Turchia da venerdì scorso a domenica. Nella prima giornata del viaggio apostolico ho salutato le autorità del paese a larghissima maggioranza musulmano, ma nella cui Costituzione si afferma la laicità dello Stato. E abbiamo parlato con le autorità sulla violenza. È proprio l'oblio di Dio e non la sua glorificazione a generare violenza. Per questo ho insistito sulla importanza che cristiani e musulmani si impegnino insieme per la solidarietà, per la pace e la giustizia, affermando che ogni Stato deve assicurare ai cittadini e alle comunità religiose una reale libertà di culto. Nel secondo giorno ho visitato alcuni luoghi simbolo delle diverse confessioni religiose presenti in Turchia. L'ho fatto sentendo nel cuore l'invocazione al Signore, Dio del cielo e della terra, Padre misericordioso dell'intera umanità. Il terzo e ultimo giorno, festa di Sant'Andrea Apostolo, ha offerto il contesto ideale per consolidare i rapporti fraterni tra il Vescovo di Roma, successore di Pietro, e il Patriarca Ecumenico di Costantinopoli, successore di Andrea, fratello di Simon Pietro, che ha fondato quella chiesa. Cari fratelli e sorelle, Dio Onnipotente e Misericordioso continui a proteggere il popolo turco, i suoi governanti e i rappresentanti delle diverse religioni. Possano costruire insieme un futuro di pace, così che la Turchia possa rappresentare un luogo di pacifica coesistenza fra religioni e culture diverse. Preghiamo inoltre perché per intercessione della Vergine Maria lo Spirito Santo renda fecondo questo viaggio apostolico e favorisca nella Chiesa il fervore missionario per annunciare a tutti i popoli nel rispetto e nel dialogo fraterno che il Signore Gesù è verità, pace e amore. Solo Lui è il Signore.
Now, after the audience, Pope Francis was presented with a unique gift: 2 donkeys and several liters of donkey's milk for the Pope's pediatric hospital. Now, in Italy, donkey's milk is often given to babies who are allergic or intolerant to cow's milk. The 2 donkeys will take up residence at the papal farm in Castel Gandolfo. And on Thursday, the Pope met with the President of Mozambique. Let's look at the resignations and nominations and see who is going where. In Colombia, Bishop Luis Alberto Para Mora has resigned due to health reasons. Now, Bishop Para Mora was an outspoken critic of the FARC, and some people were concerned that perhaps his resignation was linked to that. Instead, he told local media he has diabetes, which is causing him to lose his vision. Sale, Australia has a new bishop. Father Patrick O'Regan will become bishop of that diocese. He hails from Bathurst in New South Wales. He was administrator for the Diocese of Bathurst in 2008 and was later made chancellor of that diocese. He has also served as pastor at various parishes in the region. Vatican Connections is interactive. We answer your questions and explain things you want to know. You can reach us on Twitter at VatiConnections or by email at info@saltandlighttv.org. We'll try our best to answer your questions during this part of our show. That's it for this edition of Vatican Connections. Now, last week we answered a viewer question about how bishops are appointed. Due to popular demand, we'll be putting that answer on our blog in writing, and you can check out our blog for that text, saltandlighttv.org/blog. Join us again next time for more of what's going on at the heart of the Church. From everyone here, thanks for watching and see you next time.